Okay, but let me ask, because I mean, the reasons for my getting involved with Buddhism are completely different from your own. Why now? So let's say in the year 2021, why in 2021 would you want to be involved in Buddhism? And I mean that in the broadest sense, whether you're referring to it as a textual tradition or as a cultural tradition or a temple, but like not necessarily any one element of it. But why, in the broadest sense, Buddhism is kind of why would you want to be involved in 2021? What motivates you positively?
So I grew up in a very violent household. I grew up enduring a lot of physical abuse. And when I was in my early teens, I found a book about Japanese culture. And there was so much serenity and tranquility. I'm like, I don't know what this is. And it fascinated me because my house was not tranquil. And so I felt like I needed self-control. I needed to understand where the anger was coming from. Now, I got away from that. Like I told you, I went into a lot of drugs. I went into a lot of drinking. My father was an alcoholic. There was just a lot of rampant drugs in my house. And so I got away from everything. And then when I separated from my wife because I was working too much, I really felt like I needed to have some sense of, I just wanted to get back to the place where I felt tranquil and I felt like I could work on myself and do better and be the best dad I could be for my kids. And I felt like Buddhism was it because it had been such a large part of my life. But I don't know what it is anymore. I can't even tell people I'm a Buddhist because I'm embarrassed for all the things that they think it is.
Right.
And so I don't even know what I am. But I go back to the Dhammapada, or I go back to...
Okay, wait, but wait, let me just pause. Let me just point this out to you. But your answer has almost entirely been about you. It's not
Yes.
been about Buddhism.
Well, I think the sad part is that I think there are a lot more people like me who have been wanting to get involved in it, but have hit the wall of just so much fraud, so much bullshit, so much lying that we get just pissed, like we just leave because there are very few people who tell the truth.
Yes.
And when I came across your information, I was blown away because I had this feeling that what I was reading in the canon that I was misinterpreting because everybody else, like Bhikkhu Bodhi, like all of those people were saying that my thoughts were wrong. Now, I don't read Pali, but I was kind of getting the intention of, is that the intention of what he said? Now, I've run into some people. I don't know if you've heard of Daniel Ingram. Have you heard of this guy?
Oh, I have, but I haven't heard the name for 10 years or something. Sorry, I could Google it, but I just say, when you say that name, I think, where do I know that from? So go on, yeah.
He is the Vipassana, like I call him the Harry Potter of Buddhism because he basically says that, he's gone through all levels of jhana and, he wrote a book about it and he's one of these guys who just believes that Buddhism is all about meditation, right? But everything he spoke about is all hallucination.
Right.
And I asked him that straight out. I emailed him. I said, listen, this just sounds like your hallucinations.
Right.
And,
But he's already
he
very rare, though. If he's willing to talk about what he saw and felt when he thinks he experienced jhana, that's already very, very rare. Most people
Well,
are...
he got in a lot of shit for it.
Right. But most people are evasive. And, they don't really, including Buddhist monks, they will not really admit to what it is they believe in or what they think they've experienced. But anyway, go on. There's a kind of honesty in that, even if it's complete bullshit or even if it's an intentional cult scam, because most people are so evasive. Go on, yeah.
He wrote a whole book on it. And again, I went through the book. I was kind of taken aback by it because,
I can already tell you're too smart for this. I'm sorry, just but the tone of your voice. I talk to so many people in Buddhism where, from the first minute you talk to them, like, oh, well, my life is a dream and I just float through life. But I mean, those people, they're out there in their tens of thousands and their hundreds of thousands. There are people who are born victims for this. But I mean, look, even if you didn't tell me the rest of the story, I already know in a sense where this is going because you are not dumb enough to be an uncritical victim of this. But I have sympathy. A lot of people are dumb enough, and they matter too. But anyway, go on. I mean,
well, no, I've run into way too many people who want to have somebody tell them what Buddhism is and then just do what they say. They don't want to read anything. They don't give two shits about the Pali Canon. They just want to do a ritual, grab a magic charm, and pretend their life is peaceful. I can't do that. I've never been one to do that. I went to that temple, and the only reason I went there is because it's the only Buddhist temple in the entire area. It's sadly, It's a bunch of people who are free to make magic charms, to talk about demonic spirits, and how if you bow 300 times today, reciting the name Amitabha 1,000 times in earnest, then you're better off Buddhist than anybody who understands anything about Buddhism.
Right.
So I was one of 2 white people in this entire place. I was trying to learn Mandarin because I wanted to fit in so badly. They were calling me White Monkey. Somebody told me they were calling me that.
Maybe you could get upgraded to the Golden Monkey or something. Maybe.
I didn't donate enough to get there. But yeah, it was weird because I was doing all this free labor to them. Like, it was almost. I'm starting to write about it. The title of the book so far is called "Forget the Starving, Feed the Statues," and that basically is my entire experience. We had people come to the temple begging for food.
Hey, maybe the title could be "The First of the White Monkeys." No?
Yeah, the first of the white monkeys, right? The weird thing is, it's like, I don't want to sound like I'm racist, but I was willing to do everything for this temple, and they were promoting me as a white person. They gave me this coveted position of like tour guide for this stupa. Yeah. And the stupa's gorgeous, don't get me wrong. There's relics in there. If I could get you in there, right now it's closed. They have got like palm leaf poly up there, locked away. Yeah. And I would love to get you in there, but I'm not allowed on the property. But
I've seen a lot of palm leaf manuscripts, so don't worry about it. I'm not missing.
Well, no, I just don't know. It's all forgeries, though. Do you know what I mean? Like.
Oh yeah. Well, what normally happens is just that people. Well, for one thing, ethically and legally, it may be illegal to buy these things, but they're available for purchase. It's just that people. Really? Oh yeah. There are thousands and thousands of them throughout Southeast Asia, but most time people buy them not knowing what they are. Now, the people who are doing it for money, then it's like baseball card collecting, where they're buying this stuff and then find out what it is and they hope it's worth money, and basically it never is. I mean, basically with Theravada Buddhism, there is no such thing as a financially valuable manuscript. There's no market for that. By contrast, Tibetan art can be worth a lot of money. So people who buy up Buddhist paintings and statuary from Tibet, they can do that in a for-profit basis. Even say Buddhist sculptures from Myanmar. But actual Pali manuscripts, they're either worth zero or they're worth less than it cost you to import them and export them. But, in terms of what people buy, and back in the old days, I got some questions on the internet. It's been a long time where people emailed me photographs of a manuscript, and normally they'd say they had acquired it from their grandfather and not purchased it in the black market. Wow. Sometimes you tell them, well, bad news, it's not written in Pali, it's actually written in this other language from this other period of time. Or sometimes you say, guess what, it's Laotian folklore, it's not really a Buddhist text, it's the equivalent of Robin Hood in that culture. But, Robin Hood is not the Bible, in the same sense, folklore is not the Buddhist canon. That stuff is going on. It's just that there's really no money in the game. The most pathetic and tragic thing is that the actual archives, which I spent a lot of time visiting, so like the official government archives in Sri Lanka, the official government archives in poorer countries like Laos and Cambodia, they actually do get looted. And it is widely, it is widely presumed that it's their own staff, it's their own employees stealing. Right. Well, it could be someone like a janitor, but of course it could also be a thief. It could be someone who comes in. But somebody is going into these places and stealing the Buddhist manuscripts and then selling them on the black market. And yeah. So the good news is nobody cares. But no, that's a mass phenomenon. And I went to one of those manuscriptoria with a Buddhist monk who'd last been there 5 years earlier, and he was able to say, whoa, there's a lot of stuff missing from the shelves that was here 5 years ago. And, so this is a mass phenomenon. When I was in Laos, there was, so just to be clear, the vast majority of manuscripts in a country like Laos are of no historical significance. It's just, they're books. But there was one discovered that I think was 400 years old or something, and it was really important. And they were these German researchers who discovered it, because you have to care to note. Like if you have a pile of manuscripts, and a whole bunch of them are from the late 19th century and are worthless, and then there's one that's 400 years old, it's only going to stand out if you're somebody like me who cares about it. Like you notice you first notice the style of handwriting is different, and then you say, whoa, let's take a look. So some German researchers there, I met those guys. We weren't friends, but there were people I'd literally drank coffee with him. Coffee wasn't that great. Anyway, they discovered, and they said, wow, okay, great. Well, let's set it out on this table, and we'll come back tomorrow morning and start photographing it. Because it's easier to work with digital photographs and start studying it. But the photographs will be preserved. They came back the next morning, and there wasn't anything on that table anymore. So again, it's presumed that one of the employees, they just saw this. Oh, the white people are getting excited that this particular book is worth money, and the person stole it to sell it on the black market. But whether it's the black market or not, who would pay even $100 or something like that? It's very, very hard to imagine. If something's beautifully illustrated, then it's worth money because of the illustrations. But basically, the real Pali Canon, the real Buddhist manuscripts never are illustrated, unless it's something like a medical essay in Pali, like describing how different medicines. But there are illustrated things are worth money because of the illustration. But yeah, that's long story short about manuscripts. And I have been in meetings at museums. I used to be employed in the museum sector, and I never signed any contract saying I wouldn't talk about this stuff or keep it secret, by the way, where people were sitting and openly talking about the illegal manuscript trade, like buying them for the museum, and the statuary trade, buying up Buddhist statues. So that is ongoing, and where the tricks to take something criminal and make it just barely legal were very much being discussed, and how even the most respectable museums put money into this. From memory, I think if you export a Buddhist artifact to Switzerland, I think after 10 days or 10 business days, it's declared Swiss patrimony, and then you can auction it in Switzerland. So yeah, the way there are certain places, whether it's Switzerland, Hong Kong, or Singapore, they have laws that basically encourage the black market in fine arts. But yeah, so this stuff is available, and these cultures, they were massively productive of this kind of art. Like, Tibet was drowning in Buddha statues. The cultural obsession was making as many statues and paintings of Buddhist themes as possible. And, likewise, Southeast Asia was drowning in this stuff. So, it wasn't scarce. Say at the end of World War II, there was a lot of this stuff to be put on the black market. And, it still isn't scarce. It still isn't valuable for that reason. And sadly, it's also not valuable because of scholarship. So, sorry, one final anecdote, but this is probably more of what you're interested in because it's not really the art history side. There was one researcher who lived in Australia, and his name was Primoz Pichenko. So I assume he's from Poland originally. I'm sorry, maybe he was Estonian. Like I don't know, but I assume he was from Poland or somewhere in Eastern Europe. But he was living and working in Australia as a researcher, and he just asked the question: well, all these white people are working with the commentaries of the Pali Canon, but why do they assume there's only one set of commentaries for these ancient Buddhist texts? Why don't I just go and ask around in some traditional temples in northern Myanmar? Like, hey, do you have other commentaries? And the answer is yes. And, right, now I can't say right away, but I think his research trip was only like 20 days long. He wasn't out there for years looking. I forget I'm sorry if it was 20 days or 30 days. But, he had a job back in Australia, but he went. He visited some Buddhist temples. He talked to some monks, I think, through a translator, and they took him to the manuscript tours. Yeah, I think we have some stuff like that. And there were some ancient manuscripts there that were other, commentarial traditions that compete with Buddhaghosa. So Buddhaghosa is not the same person as the Buddha. For listeners in the audience, he is the person who wrote what are referred to as the commentaries, but he wasn't.
Yeah,
right. He had competition, but this is the point: he wasn't the only author on the planet. At approximately that time or whatever. So he found apparently some other commentaries, and then he died. And the point is, nobody had attempted this kind of research before him, and nobody attempted this kind of research after him. And apparently at that time, so this is maybe now 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was alive. I was, as you're about to hear, I was involved in my tiny way. At that time, You could do it. You could go out and discover new ancient Buddhist manuscripts nobody had translated, nobody had looked at before. So this has happened. This has happened rarely. It happened with the discovery of one manuscript in Cambodia, which it was an ancient Pali manuscript from India, but hadn't been known before it was discovered in Cambodia. But it happens so rarely because nobody's looking, nobody's interested, nobody cares. Probably, especially in Myanmar. In any case, who do you think emailed his widow after his death, asking about completing this research project, or at least cleaning up the bits and pieces of it? Because he died in the middle of researching this and publishing it, so probably there's work that's done, but that hasn't been done. I did. I got in touch with this. And I was right. So in case you think there's a ton of intellectual, resources going to waste here, in case you think there's a whole lot of talented people in the world, no, there's incredibly little talent. There are incredibly few sincere intellectuals. The majority of the people who are involved in the game are insane cult members of one kind or another.
So that's really why I wanted to talk to you, though, is because I think what I find the most offensive thing is that if anybody's really serious about this practice, you have to accept the fact that there's spirits and ghosts. I get it, right? I don't, it is what it is. I take it for what it is. But what I have a problem with is people like yourself are institutionally pushed away because you have answers and nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to talk about it. No, they just want to be okay with really bad interpretations and go from there. It's almost like people like you are not allowed to exist because how dare you?
Right.
And then I remember you had that phone call with that professor, and he did his damnedest to keep you out of Buddhism as a path.
Right.
And secondly, then blamed your attitude on the reason why you'll never succeed. And it's you're wait a minute, I have the answers, and it's that doesn't matter. And his answer was basically, nope. No, we just don't like you, even though you know what you're talking about more than we do.
Yeah.
But let's just blame the messenger. And that's why I'm watching your videos going, well, wait a minute, this can't be the whole story. But the more and more that I listen and read, I'm like, that is the whole story. They just want to make sure you don't have a platform. They could give a fuck if they don't know anything. I took a course through Princeton, and I got my money back because the guy that was teaching the course didn't fucking know anything, and he was teaching Soku Gokkai the entire time. And I'm like, that's not really Buddhism.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And he is the head of Buddhism for that university.
Yep.
And I'm like, you're a Soku Gokkai member. I said that to him on chat. I'm like, that is not Buddhism, my friend. You are in a cult. And he said, if you don't like it, that's what the course is about. And I'm like, well, no, I don't. I want my money back. So I got my money back.
Yep.
And I'm like, I hear you, and I'm like, you should have been one of the main proponents of shaping how we study this, how we practice it. But nobody wants to hear from you, and it blows my fucking mind.
So, okay, look, I partly agree with you. The sense in which I disagree is to kind of get to an even simpler level of what Buddhism and the cult mentality does to people. So, just to be clear, Buddhism doesn't have to be a cult, but it is for most people involved in it. For me, it wasn't a cult, and I didn't have these kinds of supernatural beliefs. I didn't believe in ghosts or demons. I didn't believe in reincarnation. Right. So, it doesn't have to be. And in my videos, one of the most positive things I say is, this could be meaningful for you in the same way that Shakespeare is meaningful for people.
Yes.
And I think that's
there is good content there. There's good philosophy there if you're willing to do the hard work.
Well, I don't know if you've ever known the sort of romantic, wistful character who, when tragedy strikes, quotes Shakespeare. There are people like that. It's Shakespeare is something you can quote at a funeral. You can give a speech at a funeral. You can quote it at a wedding. And when things happen in life, you can kind of live with the literature of Shakespeare in this way. That's meaningful, but it's not magical. It doesn't solve your problem. It's not like, oh, I know just what to do in this situation because Shakespeare told me what to do.
If you think about it, though, that's all people are giving the credence of it's almost like, as long as I have a meme that the Buddha said this, then things are magically better. And it's like, you don't know the Buddha said that. Secondly, this whole thing is not about memes, but it just seems to be co-opted by mindfulness, by yoga, by all these people who just want to bastardize it for profit.
Yes.
And it's like it doesn't make enough money on its own. So
Right.
we have to.
Right,
we
but
have to do-
some of those people are sincerely insane, though. It's not always
Oh
profit.
yeah,
It's not
we
always
have
so.
a lot of them around here.
Right.
Girls
No, but I
charge
mean,
$1,500 for meditation classes.
Right.
Like, I mean, come on.
sure, but as much as the money motive may prevail, it's always important to keep in mind some of them are sincere, and their sincerity precisely indicates craziness. But so just to finish what I was saying before we got into Shakespeare,
Yeah, sorry.
you know, my experience is that Buddhists will not even be emotionally able to ask me a question like, "How are things in Cambodia?" And it shows how brittle their worldview is. We're like, we can't even talk about that. Now, I'm not going to praise Catholicism as the greatest religion in the world. I'm obviously not really a fan of Catholicism. But I do think Catholics can sit down and say, wow, I just got back from a vacation in Sicily. How are things with the church in Sicily? Well, it's really corrupt, and it wasn't what I was expecting based on my experience in Spain. Oh, really? Yeah, when I was in Spain, I lived in Barcelona, and it was like this, and now I was in southern Italy, in Sicily, and it was like that. Catholics can talk in a worldly, pragmatic way about what's going on in the church. They can talk about the politics of the church, how the church relates to and struggles with the world. They can talk about topical issues like evolution and the church's attitude towards evolution and homosexuality. So this, in any other context, this might be kind of damning the Catholics by faint praise. But I mean this as sincere praise. Catholics can deal with all that stuff. In my experience with the Buddhists, even the best, the most elite Buddhists, like elite in the sense of having PhDs. Sorry, I should be more clear, because I just really mean elite education in this sense.
Yeah.
They cannot just ask me or appreciate that I know something interesting because I've spent time in Cambodia. Like, it's not about right or wrong. Like, it's not like I'm going to prove you wrong or I'm going to debunk what you believe in, telling you about Cambodia. But just, can we talk about Cambodia? And if we can't talk about Cambodia, then we can't talk about slavery, and we sure as hell can't talk about the fact that Buddhists believe that when people are reincarnated with a disability, it's their own fault, and there are all kinds of.
I've experienced that. I picked up Shifu, and we went to get some groceries, and there was a guy on the side of the road asking for change, so I gave him some, and he said, "How dare you?" He said, "You just messed with his karma." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? The guy's he's homeless. Yeah. We're supposed to help people." He's like, "No, that's his karma. That's his problem." I'm like, "What? Wow. Are you fucking crazy?" And I was just like, I'm sat there going, "No, we help people because he's in our lives. We're supposed to do what we can to ease people's suffering." He couldn't get over the fact that I did that. He was like, "Oh, you've just damned him to more bad karma." And I'm just like, "Nope, I don't believe it. I don't believe it, and I will not believe it." Because I said, if that's what this is about, I don't want any part of it.
Back to the Dark Ages. But the other thing you wrote to me about is racism within Buddhism. But if we're talking about Chinese Buddhists specifically, I would say it is fairly common for them to believe that people are reincarnated as black rather than white. Similarly, as a punishment for bad karma. Now, I would not say that's 100% of Chinese people believe that. But if you ask them, so something that they'd be more comfortable answering is, say, the difference between being born Chinese and being born Mongolian, and they regard Mongolians as inferior, is that the result of bad karma? Many Chinese would immediately say that, yes, the difference between being incarnated as Chinese or Mongolian is
well, heck, if you're not a Han Chinese, you're basically not that good either. Well, the thing was, I was a white guy, so for some reason, they thought I was going to bring in all these white people and bring in more money, which wasn't the case at all. But then secondly, when a black gentleman came in and asked to volunteer, he was literally told to, get the fuck out. And it was like, I'd never seen her do that. And I said to her, why? And she's like, no, I want none of his kind here. And I'm like, oh, I get it now.
Well, when you put it that way.
Yeah, but then the thing was, women had to stay on one side of the temple, men were on the other. Women had to follow men because men were more important. And it was scorching hot one day in the temple. We have 80-year-old women there. I wasn't even allowed to put a fan on them while we did evening prayer because the spirits would enter through their ears if I did.
Right.
And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? And I'm like, I can't, I just, this is too much for me, right? It was so crazy, I couldn't deal with it. Mm. And then when people were taking pictures with me, I'm like, no, I'm a fucking circus sideshow here. I can't do this anymore, right? I can't. And so I left, but These guys are building $100 million temple. And I'm like, where are you getting this money from? Like, literally, where are you getting it from? And the only thing I could think of is there's money pouring into that church or that temple that, I don't know, dude. It just reeks to me of so much bad stuff. It's not Buddhism. I don't know what they do, but they wear little stop counters around their neck, and they count Amitabha. And if they say it 10,000 times in one day, well, the next day they got to say it 10,001.
Right.
And that's all they give a shit about. And I'm like...
And as you probably know, Amitabha does not appear in the Pali Canon. It's not something Buddha ever taught.
Because I didn't know for 100% sure.
Yeah.
But, you know, I say, like, I know you said Guan Yin has nothing to do in the Pali Canon, and I was pretty certain of that. But I didn't know about Amitabha. But I'm like, hey, if you could just make up Buddhas and then just say, well, I don't want to practice... I don't want to practice what the actual Buddha said, if he existed. I want to practice what one we made up said. I mean, that's just like, oh, fuck's sakes. Like, how can it be this way? You can't make a new Jesus, and say, I'm just going to follow this guy now.
Well, people can and they do. On the contrary.
Well, I guess that's what all Mormonism is about, right?
You can start a new religion. We can start a new religion tomorrow. You can take everything you've just learned and start a new religion.
Why are people in Buddhism so just okay with people just fucking with it in every way, shape, or form? Like, even atheists will defend Buddhism. Zen, to me, is the most fucking corrupt of them all.
Yes.
You're just supposed to sit there and stare at a wall and things will just magically get better in your life, right? There's no goal.
Right.
You can't have a goal when you practice.
Well, and Zen is the most authoritarian, too. You're not allowed to ask questions and so on. Yeah. So the element of blind obedience and blind faith is really the worst there.
It's fucking ritual, man. It is. It's just, I wear the Rokasu and I have a title and I'm so special and I have a Dharma name and I just don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I can't tell people.
Have you considered converting to Mormonism? I mean, what am I going to do?
Well, I've considered just like leaving it all behind. I just got finished reading the Gita, and it basically has a lot of similar situations that the Buddha talked about. But then again, it's all about, you better honor Krishna and do everything for Krishna. And I'm like, I don't need to do that. I just need to focus on my life, my kids, try to get myself back to a place.
So
I feel like I had more sense of it when I was 12 than I do now.
Okay, but let me ask, because I mean, the reasons for my getting involved with Buddhism are completely different from your own. Why now? So let's say in the year 2021, why in 2021 would you want to be involved in Buddhism? And I mean that in the broadest sense, whether you're referring to it as a textual tradition or as a cultural tradition or a temple, but like not necessarily any one element of it. But why, in the broadest sense, Buddhism is kind of, why would you want to be involved in 2021? What motivates you positively?
So I grew up in a very violent household. I grew up enduring a lot of physical abuse. And when I was in my early teens, I found a book about Japanese culture. And there was so much serenity and tranquility. I'm like, I don't know what this is. And it fascinated me because my house was not tranquil. And so I felt like I needed self-control. I needed to understand where the anger was coming from. Now, I got away from that. Like I told you, I went into a lot of drugs. I went into a lot of drinking. My father was an alcoholic. There was just a lot of rampant drugs in my house. And so I got away from everything. And then when I separated from my wife because I was working too much, I really felt like I needed to have some sense of, I just wanted to get back to the place where I felt tranquil. And I felt like I could work on myself and do better and be the best dad I could be for my kids. And I felt like Buddhism was it because it had been such a large part of my life. But I don't know what it is anymore. I can't even tell people I'm a Buddhist because I'm embarrassed for all the things that they think it is.
Right.
And so I don't even know what I am. But, I go back to the Dhammapada or I go back to...
Okay, wait, but let me just pause. Let me just point this out to you. But your answer has almost entirely been about you. It's not been about Buddhism. Now, I'm not saying that, but I'm sure that's a completely sincere answer, and it's probably the right answer. But, like, aside from the aesthetics of Japanese culture, which you can have in your life. I mean, without Buddhism, you become a Japanophile, and many people do. You can make Japan your winter vacation destination every year. You could spend a month in Japan every year and learn Japanese, and whatever it is you like about Japan, you can enjoy that in life. But with that exception, all you've been talking about is you, and not saying like there's something I want to learn or know or access through Buddhism. Just really, really brief parallel but totally different situation. I was giving advice to a young woman recently about Thailand, and so she's allegedly going to learn Thai and move to Thailand and get a job in Thailand. And one of the simplest questions I asked her was, why Thailand? Because it could be Egypt. You could go to Egypt. Well, not anywhere. I mean, right now it probably can't be Iran. Afghanistan probably off them. There are places that are kind of just more comfortable or more humanly possible. I mean, even the contrast between Thailand and Cambodia and Laos and so on. I know, but like, can you be honest with me? And can you be honest with yourself about why Thailand? Because you're talking about making a sacrifice or commitment. You're doing work with the next 5 years of your life, whether it's a sacrifice or not. That will change your life forever. And if you chose Japan instead of Thailand, or Egypt instead of Thailand, or Poland, that could change your life and your future forever too. So why Thailand? Now, look, I mean, you just say, in some ways it's deeper, in some ways it's shallower to ask, why Buddhism? But I'm not saying retroactively there has to be a good answer. Like, I'm sure within the last few years, the answer you've given me is the answer. You were upset about your divorce, you had this and that on your mind. But now looking ahead at the next 5 years, I don't know how much of a commitment you've already made to Chinese as a language. Chinese is a lot of work.
Not much. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good. Then it's not a huge loss to shift that way. Because I mean,
no.
Because
I felt like
right.
it was a fraud anyway. So it was very hard for me to commit myself to learning a language when I knew deep down inside that I didn't really care for most of the people I was speaking with. So it wasn't. I don't know. I think I was trying really hard to be a part of their group. But you're right. I mean, why Buddhism? I don't know. Why did I pick up the Gita and find the same things and say, well, it's not for me? I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm looking, why am I not a stoic? I'm a person that likes to take action in life. I like to find some sense of purpose. I like to be accountable and responsible for my own actions. Why not stoicism? I don't know. Stoicism seems to me like it's blowing up too, and people love getting memento mori tattoos, like they know something, but I guess I felt like there was a connection there prior. Like, I felt that there was something spiritual there, but I'm not a hugely spiritual person.
Right.
There was no God to pray to. There was none of that. I felt like that was positive, but I felt like the Pali Canon was saying you have to do the work to get the results. And that's something that I like, because I want to be responsible to myself to do the work. Whereas a lot of religions, I show up on Sunday, I say a couple Hail Marys, and I'm good to go. That's just not me. I need to do the work. I need to hold myself accountable.
Right.
But I need a system.
So look, you are. We're keeping you anonymous. I don't mind. I mean, if you want to, we can out you. But you are approximately 50 years old, right?
Yeah, I am 50. Yeah.
Right. So another question is: at what point do you stop reading other people's books and following other people's philosophies, and write your own and follow your own?
That's right. What you said that really blew my mind, is that these are just stories. How come you're not writing your own? And I'm like, holy fuck, because I've never felt like I was legitimate enough to write my own. But when you said that, I thought about that for about 4 hours and said, wait a minute, it's just a story. It's just a fucking story. How come I cannot write my own? Right, but
but look, it may be that that's something you're doing at age 60. Like, it may not be. It may not be at age 50. I wasn't writing my own, say, 10 years ago. Now, that's partly because I was just busy doing other things. But,
you've been doing a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think you devote yourself so much to it. You know what I mean? You're the person that passes me off as somebody who just gently looks into something. You don't give me that impression at all. If you're going to talk about it, it's because you know about it, right? So I think you dedicate yourself to things quite a bit.
Well, I wanted to put in a kind of footnote on that too, because some people would hear what I just said, and I've talked to people who have this attitude and think, oh, they can close up all their books or burn their bookshelf and just focus on being a creative person, ex nihilo, working from nothing. So right now I'm writing a book. I've ended up researching certain court cases for this book, like going through the records of exactly what the judge said in court to include in the book. Yeah. So, I mean, my point is just very simply, creative writing also involves reading. Now, even if I were going to write a comedy movie, like a script for a comedy movie, I would probably end up doing research and reading to write that, something about the setting or whatever. So now that's a relatively shallow example. But, I'm not saying learn nothing. I think if you are, I think if you are articulating your own ideas and kind of writing your own books and regarding yourself as a creative person, there are research elements to being a creative person. And I think there are also destructive elements to being a creative person. Like, I think it's completely legitimate to kind of lash out at what it is you don't like about Buddhist culture or Canadian culture, or to write something that really, demolishes these things. So I just say, when I'm talking about regarding yourself creatively, kind of first and foremost, that does not mean that I think that at age 50 you have nothing more to learn. I'm now 42, and I still have a hell of a lot to learn, and I am learning. But I'm not learning passively. Like, I'm very much learning to get kind of bricks that I'm putting in the wall of what it is I'm building myself. Yeah.
Well, I've always taken that approach of kind of the Jeet Kune Do of religion for me. I've always tried to Bruce Lee it in the sense of like what works and what doesn't, and the only way it works is if I test it.
Okay. So let me push back. The problem is, if you start from the premise that whatever the Buddha taught is profound and true and right, and then you're never going to do that, right? Like just even having that worshipful attitude, as opposed to, I remember kind of blowing somebody's mind. This is a very straightforward example of translation and mistranslation. It was a particular, very short passage from the Pali Canon. So I think it was like 4 or 5 sentences long. But it was really warning that people who meditate go crazy. Now, I'm sure the meaning is, hey, because it's still true today, but probably at that time in ancient India, some of these people were meditating and they were hallucinating and believing in the hallucinations, exactly the same issues we encounter in the 21st century. That this was really a very stark warning about hallucination, insanity, use of the word insanity in Pali, resulting from meditation. And the translation of it into English was like super vague. It was like, how can we softball this as much as possible? And so this person sent me this and said, oh, wow. And I wrote back and said, oh, wow, you found a really interesting passage, because this is, whoever wrote this passage in the Pali Canon obviously had a very skeptical view of the fact that some people, when they meditate, go nuts.
Absolutely.
But part of what blew the person's mind I was talking to was that I said, whoever wrote this. And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, oh, well, don't you realize, like, at least a few dozen people, if not a couple hundred people, participated in writing the Pali Canon. It wasn't written by one person. And
all of the councils, right? Ashoka changed it. Everybody changed it.
But even before that, the very first authorship, these different little scraps of text reflect different people's perspective. Like they're not the same philosophy. Whoever wrote this passage was someone who had this very critical view of meditation. But there are other passages that are 100% uncritical of meditation, that are 100% uncritical of hallucination itself, that just seem to describe whatever you see when you're hallucinating as being some kind of valid transcendental experience of a higher reality.
And that is what has been just ripping apart Western Buddhism, is it's tied into like psilocybin use. It's been tied into like spirit rock with all the sexual problems, and like Shambhala and over in Nova Scotia with all their sexual problems. And
it kills me with Noah Levine too, because like I hold certain people to such a higher standard. Like this guy who is not only entrenched in recovery, but also in like Buddhist philosophy. Like Buddhism and meditation is like figuring out ways to let go of ego, right? Let go of pride, to work through urges and cravings. And then you hear about him like forcing himself on women. I'm like, what have you been doing? Like, you created something that's supposed to help you fight these urges and work through them and be a better person. I'm just like, what are you doing, man?
A 64-page report describing 2 credible allegations of sexual misconduct against a former Boulder spiritual leader, Sakyong Mipham Rinpoche. According to the Denver Post, a Canadian law firm conducted that investigation, which found the spiritual leader abused his power. The leader of the Buddhist community stepped aside from his role as head of Shambhala last July after these allegations surfaced, and he did write a letter to followers acknowledging how his past relationships caused harm.
It seems to me like it's just rotten from the core, and that's why I don't want to tell people that I even think about it, because there's, anybody that looks can see that there's, you even posted about all the sexual scandals with You know, with that, like, it just seems to be everywhere. It's like, it's okay for a llama to get drunk in front of you because it's a llama. You know,
Right.
He knows what he's doing. Don't worry about it. It's okay for a llama to have 15 cars, even though you're not supposed to have cars. I read a book by a guy named Bhante Demak, and he wrote a book called Broken Buddhism. And he spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia. And he was saying that the temples he went to, there was so much corruption, so many things going on. And this was in the late 90s, that he didn't know what to do anymore as a monk who's been, you know, a monk for almost all of his life. And he was just saying, like, everywhere he went, they told him that if he didn't go along with them, that he had to get the hell out of the temple. And so, you know, he didn't. And so he got himself in a lot of trouble. But he wrote about this whole series, and I'm reading it going, like, they were actually a part of a child predator ring in Thailand, where they were bringing young girls or young boys into the temple and then, so, you know, soliciting them out for sexual favors. It was just mind-blowing, you know, and I'm just, how do people not give a shit about this? Then we've got the guy now. And
I'll give you a moderate example. One of the most famous and prestigious temples in Thailand is called the Marble Temple. That's how it's known. I knew a monk who was resident there for a couple of years, and he told me that there was a young man who joined the temple, and how this is already a form of corruption. How it is that you get a bed or a seat at a prestigious temple as opposed to a poverty-stricken temple, there's already a lot of shenanigans involved with that. This young man, as I recall, his father had just died. And if it wasn't his father, it was his grandfather. But something like that. There'd been death in the family, and he made a resolution. He said, I'm going to become a monk until I earn 1 million Thai baht. and that's a lot less than 1 million US dollars, but still, it's a nice round number. He was going to earn 1 million Thai baht, and I think his target was to do it within a year. He was going to become a monk and earn as much money as possible, as fast as possible, and then quit, go back to go into a business
reasonable.
To make his father proud or something like this. You know, he got this into his head.
Like
This,
a good career
he was,
path,
and you know, he was making money. You know, this is less corrupt than the kind of scandals. Of course, there have been scandals with Buddhist monks being involved in outright gangsterism or what have you. But he was earning money by doing traditional chanting rituals, blessing the house to give some kind of magical lucky quality to the house. So, you know, he was going around with a group of monks doing this for pay. Now, in case you don't know, in the Pali Canon, you are forbidden to touch money. Monks are not supposed to touch money. They're not supposed to talk about money. It even goes into some detail about how to deal with repairs to the roof. It shows, you know, that these things happen in ancient India also. Like, well, there's a hole in the roof, and you need to talk to some lay people about getting it repaired, but you don't talk about how much it costs because you can't, you know. So, you know, there are very detailed guides about how to replace your bowl because you need a new bowl, but you can't talk about how much it costs or whether or not the person has enough money to buy it. So there's an absolute prohibition on having anything to do with greed or money. But in this sense, you know, the religion, and this is Theravada Buddhism. I mean, as you know, Mahayana Buddhism is way more corrupt. That's on another level. This is the, you know, but my example is from what's supposedly the elite, you know, most esteemed. This is like the equivalent of the Vatican, you know, the pinnacle of the religion within Thailand. And it's not 90% corrupt. It is 100% corrupt.
So I guess that I mean, I have to go tuck my kids in, but
cool.
Yeah, but I just wanted to touch base with you because I think there's like I just even watched the video on The Mandalorian, and you're right, I haven't gotten to the second season yet, but I don't even think I'm going to bother because that elbow to the chest was
Well, look, this is good for our audience. If we do it as a series of shorter discussions, that's better than 1 3-hour discussion. But as far as I'm concerned, you can hear this back before I upload it. I don't think you said anything you'll want to censor, delete, but I can delete things before it goes public. But I think this is wonderful for the audience. And I just want to say really briefly, I have people writing into me asking me to make more content about Buddhism. And one of my answers is, I've posted this to Patreon lately, is like, look, one of the main reasons there isn't more content on Buddhism is that nobody will talk to me. And just in the last couple of weeks, I've emailed different university professors. And I have a long history of emailing leaders in the skeptic movement and the atheist movement saying, look, you're talking about Christian atheism all the time, but I want to deal with the problems in Buddhism and religion. Can we have a conversation? And nobody will talk to me. Nobody will listen. And I think that's part of the context for you reaching out for me now, is this terrible sense that nobody cares. And these are issues that really matter to millions of people. And
they do, yeah.
You know, even if the white people in the equation, like you and I, are kind of a minority within a minority, you know, when you talk about the big ideologies that are really going to change the world in the next 100 years, Buddhism is one of them.